going to do?
Okay, I was trying to catch you. Can you just mention if anybody hasn't gotten a ticket for the door prize, like let us know.
Okay.
Just hi, these are people that pay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi. My name is Janet Herron. I'm a member of the Coastlines Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all here this morning. I've always been a huge reader and a big fan of writers, and I also work as a communications advisor at Memorial University. I'd like to welcome you all to this edition of Coastlines and Coffee at the Signal Hill campus. And I congratulate you on being here to celebrate the amazing literary landscape we enjoy here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Coastlines began during the pandemic, and since 2020, we have featured and discussed 20 books by Newfoundland and Labrador writers with a connection to Memorial University. And if you're not already a member, you can join our continuing online discussions on Facebook. Just search Coastlines and you'll find the group. We might have collected your contact info when you came in. We're just trying to add add to our Coastlines email distribution list. So thank you very much for leaving your email. If you didn't get a very high-tech number for our door prize, please put your hand up and we'll make sure that you get a ticket. We'll be doing that draw at the end. So I've got 1, 2, 3. Rebecca there will make sure you get a ticket. Yeah, I think that door prize might consist of some books. Maybe. Coastlines is a partnership between Memorial's Office of Alumni Engagement and the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And we also would like to thank Memorial's Conference and Event Services for their support of this event. Just a few things to explain about what's going to happen this morning. We have Deirdre Newman and someone else there from the Memorial University Bookstore. They're the official Coastlines bookstore, and they are selling a selection of titles, including, of course, those of our two guests today, Perry Chafe and Michael Crummy. Please help yourself to tea, coffee, and the assorted foodstuffs over at the back of the room throughout the event. So it is casual, so feel free to get up and get more coffee, etc. There's a gender-neutral washroom just outside the main doors here to the right. We will begin the discussion at 11:30, and it will also be live streamed on the Alumni Engagement YouTube channel. Angela, our esteemed host, is more than happy to take your questions during the event. So if the spirit moves you, please put up your hand and I'll run around with the microphone. But don't ask your question unless you have the microphone, because we won't hear you. Some people in the room won't hear you, but the people also online won't hear you. The formal discussion is going to run to about 12:30 p.m., after which Perry and Michael will be up here and they will be happy to sign your books. So if you have any questions, let us know, and please enjoy yourself. And we will be starting in approximately 20 minutes. That's it. Thank you. Can we put it back on? And I'm so sorry, I forgot my friend Joan Sullivan over here at the Newfoundland Quarterly. She's over here and she has subscriptions that she'd be happy to sell you to the Quarterly and all sorts of good things over here. So sorry, Joan. I did that. That's the second time. Okay, thanks. Bye.
We're not mic'd. Can everybody? Oh, yes, you can hear us now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coastlines. I am so glad you're here with us this morning. My name is Angela Antle, as Janice said in her introduction. And I don't know how many of these I've done, but it's always a lot of fun. We love having coffee and croissants. And if you can't hear us, come up and sit at this table here where we were sitting. I'm seeing you over there leaning in. Please, feel free to move around and sit wherever you want so that you can hear the conversation, because that's why you're here. So I'm going to start things out with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands that Memorial University campuses are situated on are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We are thankful to them for their stories, for keeping this place alive and making it a very special place. And we encourage everyone to reflect on the lands where you're located and the Indigenous peoples for whom these lands are traditional territories. You want me to turn it up. So ask Luke over there in the corner and he will turn it up. Won't you, Luke? Excellent. So welcome to the Amira Innovation Exchange at Signal Hill campus. Oh, I feel like it's really loud now. I'm Angela Antle, and welcome to everyone online. And I'm thrilled to host Coastlines here with Perry Chafe and Michael Crummy. Two amazing Newfoundland writers. And we're going to talk about their books, Closer to Sea and Michael's The Adversary, both books challenging the romantic notion of Newfoundland's past. And we're happy to take any questions from the audience. And Heidi is in place to take questions. I don't know where she is, I can't see her, but she's here somewhere taking questions from those online if you'd like to ask some questions. So we're going to start with a reading from Closer by Sea from Perry Chafe. Perry is an award-winning producer, writer, showrunner, songwriter, and best-selling novelist. He was the co-creator and showrunner for the TV series Republic of Doyle, which ran for 6 seasons on the CBC. He was also an executive producer and writer for the Netflix Discovery series Frontier, starring Jason Momoa. In addition, he was an executive producer and writer for Caught, a CBC limited series based on Lisa Moore's award-winning novel of the same name. He's currently a writer and producer on Son of a Critch, and that's based on the best-selling memoir by Mark Critch, of course. And he's working in Saint-Pierre now on a 10-episode order for a new hour-long procedural detective series that he co-created. And Closer by Sea is his debut novel, and it became an instant national bestseller, which happens to all debut novelists, I think, doesn't it? Congratulations on the success of your book, and we'd love to hear a bit.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just want to say it's such an honor to be here today with everyone. I'm a huge fan of Michael Crummy's work, so it's great to be here with him. Oh, my voice is all of a sudden. Oh, wow. It's not great for the TV business when it doesn't work like that. But thank you, and Angela, thanks for the invite, and Janet, and everyone involved. So thank you so much. I'm so looking forward to the afternoon. And a little excerpt from my book, Closer by Sea, which came out last May 23rd. You coming or going? A female voice called down from above. I looked up to see her standing there. She stepped closer, blocking the glare from the sun. Anna Tessier, 12 years old to my 9. I don't know what I'm doing, I replied. You don't know if you're coming or going, she chuckled. Boys. I might go or I might stay, I said, my knuckles white from gripping the rung so tightly. Anna knelt down and extended her hand to me. Come back up. You decide the rest later. I released one hand from the ladder and grabbed hers. It was warm and surprisingly strong. On her wrist was a wide silver cuff bracelet that reflected light into my eyes, causing me to squint just a little. With her help, I began my ascent. At the top of the ladder, I stopped. I was face to face with her, with Anna. Her deep blue eyes studied me carefully under the brilliant sun until a smile formed on her full lips. I smiled back until my foot slipped off the final rung. Easy now, Anna said, as she held me fast, her slender frame much stronger than mine. You don't want to go swimming in that. We peered down to the dark, churning water. Back then, undesired parts of the fish, the guts, the organs, found their way into the harbor as the fishermen processed their catch. You could see pieces rotting away in the water. If gulls or rats didn't consume the flesh, the maggots made short work of it all. There was also a layer of sludge from some of the boat's diesel engines. It gave the water a slick, ominous hue. Needless to say, it was not a place anyone would want to fall in. I felt relieved when Anna held onto my arm as I climbed back up to the wharf. Of course I knew who she was, and she kind of knew who I was, but being 3 years older meant that she went to school in a larger town across the way, on the main island of Newfoundland, or the mainland as we called it, so we never really spoken before. Pierce, right? She asked as she brushed back her jet black hair from her lightly freckled face. Sorry about your dad. They didn't find him, I said, looking down at my feet. They gave up. So you were going to look for him yourself, she asked. Her face tightened, causing her high cheekbones to become even more pronounced. I didn't respond. I get it, she said as she adjusted her sky blue hiking backpack that had an oversized spiral notebook sticking out of the top. I'd probably do the same if it was my dad. She pointed to the fluffy cumulus clouds above the horizon. Oh my, dark clouds, there's a storm coming. It looks pretty clear to me, I replied. I knew what storm clouds looked like. Everyone living here did, including Anna. Those clouds are definitely gray, she said, doubling down on the lie. You might want to wait a couple of days. Probably a good idea, I replied, relieved. She caught me staring at the small yellow button on her jacket. At first glance, it looked like one of those happy face images I'd seen on T-shirts. But this one was different. It had the same 2 black dots for eyes, but it sported a frown instead of a smile. I'd never seen one quite like it before. Anna climbed down the ladder into the boat, retrieved my backpack, and shot back up as quickly as she went down. Don't forget this, she said, handing my bag to me. Then she turned and started walking away. But a few steps, she turned again and walked back towards me. She took off the frowny face button from her coat and pinned it to my blue windbreaker. Here, she said, hold on to this for me. She turned once more and really did walk away. I began to wonder what she was doing on the wharf on this quiet Sunday afternoon. I would find out the next time we crossed paths. I would see Anna twice more before she, too, would go missing.
Thank you for setting up the mystery
Oh,
for
thank
us.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, so now it's Michael's turn. I'm going to give Michael's a little bio here. Before Michael reads, can you tell us about the pictures that we've been seeing?
Oh, sure, yes. Oh, my goodness. Pictures of Petty Harbor, my hometown. This is a view from the south side looking over at the north. Even though it was a community of just under 1,000 people, we had 3 fish plants. full on working from, the time I was a guy. No. Just above Michael's head is
okay.
the
You
breakwater,
can sit up.
the work. So it was a very, like most small communities, the hundreds in Newfoundland at the time, it depended so much on the fishery. And life, when growing up, centered around the wharf and the fish plant, 3 of them during the summer times, when we were cutting out cod tongues and helping the fishermen and the fish plant workers process fish. Yeah, so you'll see a number of them, and one of them, I think my grandfather and I are in one of the pictures and all, but yeah, and there will be some jigging of fish just outside the Narrows.
Fantastic.
So yeah, a number of, so that's life in a small community of Petty Harbour, Newfoundland, and like many others.
Thanks, Perry.
Thank you for that.
All right, now it's Michael's turn to read. So Michael Crummy, BA 87, is the author of 7 books of poetry and the short fiction collection Flesh and Blood. His first novel, River Thieves, was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. His second novel, The Wreckage, was a finalist for the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize. His third novel, Galore, won the Commonwealth Writers Prize, Canada and the Caribbean, and was a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award. His fourth novel, Sweetland, was also a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award, and there's a beautiful feature film based on the novel currently in theaters nationwide. If you get a chance to see Sweetland, go see it. The Innocents 2020 was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize and the Governor General's Literary Award. And it is the sort of prequel, I would think, for The Adversary. And something you might not know about Michael Crummy is that he can install a mean pine floor. I was in his back porch yesterday, and he said, this is the thing I'm most proud of after all of that in the bio. He was also our very first Coastline selection back in December 2020. So welcome, Michael, to read from The Adversary.
Thank you. So am I on?
You're on.
I'm on. Okay. The Innocents is not a prequel.
Oh.
I think of the books as companion pieces.
Okay.
So they actually take place over the exact same period of time. So The Innocents and The Adversary start at the same moment in time and move through the same period of time, but they happen sort of simultaneously in different locations.
So do you have to read one before the other?
You don't. You absolutely do not. You don't need to know a thing about The Innocents
I knew the answer
to read
to
The
that
Adversary.
question. Yeah.
And so The Innocents is kind of, it's about an orphan brother and sister in a tiny cove who are left to their own devices. And it's kind of a twisted Adam and Eve story. And those of you who've read the book will know what I'm talking about. This book is kind of a mirror image of that one. So again, it's about a brother and sister, but in this case, it's more a Cain and Abel story. So in The Innocents, like the defining emotion, the thing that moves the characters always is love for the sibling, even when they don't like each other very much. In this book,
Not in this book.
In this book, what moves the story is the hatred for this sibling and the act of wishing ill to that person. I was asked just before we came up whether or not this was all out of my head or if there were actual historical antecedents for the story. And there's all kinds of things in here that I found in Newfoundland history. I've stolen a bunch of stuff from Bruce Whiffin's book about Bonavista. And in that book, there was a new building being built in sort of a boggy part of the community that hadn't been touched before. And while they were digging the foundations, they discovered 3 caskets.
Oh.
And when they opened them, there were pilgrims, like dressed in the pilgrim garb. And they had no idea where these people came from, when they were buried there, why they were there. And I just thought that was too good not to do something with. So this is a little section from Abe Strap, the brother, is an arsehole. to put it mildly, and somebody who likes to build buildings and put his name upon them. And so while he's having a new house built, they find this casket, and the sister comes to have a look at it in the middle of the night just to avoid the crowds. The casket's guards were asleep when she came upon them on Abe Strapp's property. They'd emptied a bottle to deal with the nip and damp of standing stag in the open air, and in her lamp's flickering shoal of light, they looked like bodies of the drowned on the seafloor, mouths wide and their limbs adrift. She turned to the coffin, setting the glim at her feet to push the lid clear, letting it tip to the ground on the far side. At first glance, the interior was so dark it seemed empty and bottomless, and a chill of recognition passed through her. It was a tremor that was almost pleasurable, and she let it travel to the ends of her fingers and toes, to the roots of her hair before she raised the light from the ground to take a view of the corpse. The deep shadows in the sunken eyes and cheeks, the sparse, spidery hairs of the beard made the face seem a crude likeness made to mock a living person. The wide white ruff at the neck added to that impression, as if the head was separate from the rest of the sham figure, placed atop a straw effigy meant to be burnt over a bonfire. It wasn't until she saw the bony hands that she was convinced it was a real person lying there, the knuckles protruding under the gaunt, the dull nails at the ends of the fingers. The black leather book the hands folded over was invisible against the dark cloth of the doublet, but the spark of a gold ring caught her eye in the glaze and shadow of her lamp. She brought the light in closer and could see the ring was engraved. She reached to touch it, turning it slowly on its fleshless spindle until she had centered the skull stamped into the gold. A winged death's head. Her breath caught in her throat at the menacing beauty of it. It was something like desire she felt, that heavy mantle settling like a force outside herself, anointing her whether she willed it or not. A kind of greed that she mistook for love. She set to working the gold band up over the wasted finger. "Sister," Abe Strapp called behind her. She whirled away from the casket, lifting the lamp high. "Give you a fright," he said. "You're awake early, brother. The dogs were on the high ropes when you walked past the big house. I didn't think that was enough to stir a sleeper such as yourself. I'm surprised the racket didn't wake our friend in the coffin there," he said. "I saw your light and I thought I should see who was making a visit at this hour. You didn't trust your constables to look out to a dead man's welfare? What are you doing here, Mrs. Keynes?" "The same as everyone else in Mockbeggar," she said, "but I was hoping to skip the carnival of it all." Abe Strapp stepped up to the casket. "You look to have your peepers on his book." "What book?" Abe laughed. "Playing the innocent has never suited you, sister." She leaned in beside her brother, the black leather of the Bible barely visible still, though she managed to spy out its contours against the doublet. Abe looked askance at the widow. "You thought to sketch the man's visage, I imagine." She shrugged, her mouth puckering against a sickly feeling in her gut to see that Abe Strapp knew her better than she thought him capable. She said, "How long has he been buried there, do you think?" "Time out of mind, I guess." They stared at the dead man, both thinking all the time of the blood standing at their shoulder, feeling cursed to be bound to the other's muck, that hobble chafing at their flesh. "The only thing you'll take from the dead man here is his likeness, sister." "And that I have already," she said, with her infuriating smirk. She headed down the path to their father's house and passed it toward the harbor, Abe Strapp watching his sister go as far as he could see her, her shadowy raft of light rolling and dipping in the dark as if she was traveling on the ocean's swell. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's start talking about setting. You chose Mockbeggar, Bonavista. This is the second novel in that area. I can tell by your face, you're like, nope, it's not Bonavista.
Yeah, it's not Bonavista. When I was writing The Innocents, I was reading, of course, Bruce Whiffin's book.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which is called?
It's called Prime Birth.
Okay.
It's a community history of Bonavista. And I was reading in there about this place beside Bonavista called Muckbeggar. And I just love the name.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, me being the idiot I am, I assumed it didn't exist anymore. Because it's just Bonavista now, right?
Right.
So I thought I'll just take the name and
No
set
one will
it
be
somewhere
the
else,
wiser.
and no one will notice. And of course, oh, that's me. And of course, Muckbeggar is still there. So, but my feeling about where the place is further towards the Northern Peninsula. So just before you turn to the north, I was thinking of it as sort of the place that was just being settled at that time. So beyond that was wilderness and the French shore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has anyone in Muckbeggar given you grief?
No, not so far. I'm sure it's coming.
Especially now that we've highlighted
Yes,
it.
yes.
Yes. And the setting, of course, is not exactly
No.
Fogo, not exactly
Petty Harbor.
Petty Harbor?
No, I actually, but I call it Pirago, which is hilarious on a number of levels. It's like, it's Petty Harbor meets Fogo, which is great, but it's also means danger
It
in
does mean
Portuguese,
danger, yeah.
which is great. So the name just sort of kind of came out of a marriage between those two places. So it's a fictitious place, but if Petty Harbor and Fogo had a baby, it would be Pirago Island. So strange thoughts there. So if you picture Petty Harbor as an island outside of up north, that would be Pirago, because I knew the community so well. And I loved everything about that, and I still love everything about Petty Harbor. It's wonderful, but the divide there, the breakwater, I don't know how many people had a chance to visit, but it's a wonderful place not far from here.
It is like a set, really.
It
isn't
really is,
Yeah.
and we've actually filmed, I filmed parts of Cot, which you mentioned there, and Republic of Doyle, which was a real treat to go home and actually film something that you've written. But there's a divide with the breakwater, and it was settled Catholics on the north side, and of course Protestants on the south side. And it was silly to think back on it, because there was two churches, and two schools, for 1,000 people. So if you had to put your attention to something else, God knows what they could have done. But that's the way things were settled back then. So and it was a wonderful place to grow up. There was everything and nothing to do. So St. John's was not far away, but it might as well have been a million miles, because as 12-year-olds, there was no way to get there without supervision. So we made the most of it, including everything that's in the book, from cutting out tongues to riding around on trikes to pellet guns. We were like young adults, We had money for cutting out cod tongues, so all the kids had cash. It was, we're like mini adults from an early age. Things that you would probably be taken away from your parents today for, this is what we were doing. Running around with buckets and knives and yelling, "Give me your tongues." It's things of horror stories, I'm sure, out of context. But so that's where the name came from, and for my first novel, I wanted to set it in a place that I really knew, and that really spoke to me, and I was hoping that it would speak to the reader, and I've been fortunate enough that it seems to have. So,
Was it challenging? I'm sure it was, but how did you get around writing in the voice of a 12-year-old?
Oh, I've been told I'm very foolish and childish, so that was easy. It was like Maureen, my lovely partner, she said, "No, that's easy for you. Sure, 12-year-old. Probably reaching too high there." But it was just came from the memories of actually doing that, growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, where everything was about the fishery. And Michael and I were talking earlier about, there was no social media or phones and things that sort of take you away from the moments. We were fortunate enough, I think, not to have any of that. So friendships and activities outside the home are everything. So those memories for me, and I'm sure for many people, are so vivid from that time period, And it was such, the book takes place in 91, just before the cod moratorium in 92, and which devastated our province and laid off, I think it was something like 25 to 30,000 jobs overnight just went away, and 200-300 towns were affected, including Petty Harbor. So you just don't forget that. It just stays with you, and then it manifests in a book, or it comes out in other ways. So those memories are so vivid that it just sort of poured out of me into into Closer by Sea.
With very accurate swearing. There was
Oh,
great
yes. Oh, thank you.
1980 swearing in it. I was like, oh, I haven't heard that
Oh,
in
yes.
a long time.
Yes, yeah, and you know, if you talk to someone like Alan Doyle today, he still uses those. So it was easy. Just go hanging out with Alan, for who I grew up with. It all comes back. You tend to revert to how with good friends, you always sort of revert
true.
back to how you know, this comfortable non-phone, you know, how you put on your phone voice. It's sort of the opposite with when talking to good friends. You just, the accents and the old terms come out. So.
Michael, I've been dying to ask you this about Abe Strapp, who Maureen Ennis called a total arsehole, I think is what I got in my notes. And his sister says, complete arsehole.
Complete.
Yeah.
You might almost go so far as to say complete and total.
Complete and total arsehole. You know, editors tell you you can't have an unredeemable character.
Right.
You can't have someone who's all bad, but you did it. There's nothing
Yeah.
about him that is.
Well, I would go further, actually, and would say, and I know, I'm not sure if I was completely successful in this, but I feel the same way about his sister. I feel like his sister is just as irredeemable.
Certainly, if you, yes. I'm not going to give anything
So
away, but
so that was a challenge, right? To write a book where the two main characters are completely irredeemable, and also they never change.
that's true. There's no arc.
Who they are at the beginning is who they
transformation.
are at the end of the book. So it was a real question as to whether or not I was going to be able to, like, where do you place your sympathies in that circumstance? And I really had to work hard, because our natural inclination is to place our sympathies with the widow, because she's born into a world that is, by definition, unfair to her, because she's a woman.
And she's eccentric.
She's smart,
likable
like,
and
she has guts. So there are things about her that are admirable, but in the end, she's no different than Abe. No. She just operates in the world differently. So I really had to work hard to get past a reader's natural inclination to sympathize with her, and I think I managed that.
I think you did.
So what I ended up doing in this book was, to a certain extent, focusing on the characters around those two. Both of them, they're like black holes. And everybody in that world gets sucked into the orbit of one or the other of those two. And often with the best of intentions, you know, often with, you know, like youngsters like Bride and Solemn, right? They align themselves with the widow because Abe has killed their father. But that ends up in the end destroying their lives as well. So the book is kind of, it's a difficult read, I think, in some ways, because I decided when I started it to write a novel that was about the world that we're living in right now and the world that we're heading for, it feels to me. Even though this is set a couple of hundred years ago, it was really about what I was living and what we've all been living with. And if things don't change, if there isn't some kind of intervention, where are we going to end up? So I decided when I started writing this book that I was going to have the worst of who we are as people in positions of power, and I was not going to interfere with that. At no point was I going to step in and say, oh, I like this character too much to have something bad happen to them. And so I just, like, it's an odd thing for a writer to say, but I was like, I am not going to interfere in this. I'm going to set up this circumstance, and I'm going to let it play out exactly as I think it would play out, as I think it is playing out, if nothing happens to alter our trajectory.
It's too bad.
So it's a beach read.
Yeah.
It's a beach read, really.
Oh, funny. It is a really unusual thing. I mean, the hero's journey is one of those tropes that people write about. It's not always what writers follow, but this seems to be a completely new structure. Or was it inspired by anything? that you've read, or
No, again, it was inspired by
Trump?
well, Trump, certainly Abe Strapp. Abe Strapp is based loosely on a merchant in Bonavista Vista in the late 1700s who was a complete reprobate, a complete arsehole. But worse than that, like he shot and killed an Irish servant in an argument. His only punishment for that was being made a justice of the peace. As a justice of the peace, he
more power.
recruited a group of prostitutes from St. John's and set up a brothel in Bonavista Vista.
Oh, so this is all factual?
That's all factual. And everybody in Bonavista Vista hated him and wanted to get rid of him, and they wrote petitions and letters to the governor, and were stuck with him. Sounds familiar, I'm sure. And so there's that merchant character was kind of the starting place, and then Trump sort of plays into that as well. You know, like the one thing that Abe Strapp is not like the merchant is that the merchant didn't seem like a coward to me. Like he was completely reprehensible, but not a coward. Whereas Trump, I think, is the biggest coward that ever shat a turd. You know, like he's a classic bully. And so Abe Strapp is closer to Trump in that way. Like he is also a coward, a classic bully. So I kind of mixed those two things together to create him. And then the other side of that, I think, are the widow, I think, would be closer to someone like Putin, who can give you the impression that he's on your side, but is never on anybody's side but his own. And in the end, aligning yourself with someone like Putin or like the widow destroys you. You know, so it was really, it's set in Newfoundland 200 years ago, but it's not about Newfoundland, really, to my mind. It's about the worst. It's the worst of what we're living through right now.
Wow.
So, like I said,
A beach
beach
read.
reads.
Perry, I loved Pierce as a character, and how you sort of grounded him by land. Like he was land-bound in grief over his father. His friends seemed to have more freedom and more ability to go out on the land and in the water, and he's stuck.
Yeah. And again, I guess that was a product of losing his father to the ocean, which is a tragedy we're all too familiar with. So that really grounded him, and he just felt a fear from that. And then I sort of used the world of marine biology to further ground that, and the idea that, oh my God, these creatures exist down deep. So that also was playing on his mind with the use of the giant squid and all of that. But he definitely had a fear of it, and even his father's boat sort of represented his guilt and his fear, which was overturned in the yard out back, just rotting away. And that sort of represented to me his grief, but also his guilt over what happened, because he actually blamed himself. If he had to stay awake longer, maybe he would have went with his father that morning, and none of this would have happened. It would have played out as it should. He would have got home in time to go to a wedding, which I wanted to pair those two together. The idea that they were preparing for a wedding, but it ended up being a funeral, which was, again, anyone who works or lives near the ocean is all too familiar with those tragedies. So absolutely. So I really wanted to ground him, and this journey, which was more of a coming of age, that he had to go on this journey, adventure with his friends, and get a win at the end of it by finding Anna, and sort of being able to release that guilt and forming another connection, reconnecting with the ocean, which is also, it may take life, but it's also a life giver, as we all know. We all depend on it. So that's how the story would play out, but yeah, very much so. He was definitely grounded on a small isolated island by himself for a long time.
How much of this is drawing from your own? I mean, obviously the cutting out the tongues and all that business.
Oh, yes. Yeah. There's a lot of me. I think we were talking before. I was able to, again, relive a lot of my childhood through this book. The idea of cutting out tongues, living, my father was a fisherman, my mother was a plant worker.
Okay.
And my father was my grandfather, his grandfather before him. We go back to the 1700s as fishermen in Petty Harbour. So it's really in our blood. Right up until the moratorium in '92 changed all that. So I grew up there. I lived a life on the wharf. I was one of the kids. This actually happened, chasing tourists with a bucket full of tongues and a knife, yelling, "Give me your tongues, give me your tongues," and seeing the look of horror on some of these tourists. It's like, what is happening here? It was like Children of the Corn. It's like, oh no. Dear God, just give them as much money as they want and we'll get away. So all of that was real, riding on trikes, going fishing. We were, 8, 10, 12 years old, but by then you knew how to ride a bike, a trike, or you knew how to take a boat out by yourself, and you were expected to go out and fish with your dad from 12 to 13 years old, which we all did. Things that are very foreign, and it wasn't 150 years ago, it was 1970s and 80s.
Right.
And so it was just a generation ago, and so I was able to sort of tap into that experience in the book. And then the other part of it was I have a history degree, but I also worked at the Newfoundland Museum, and then the rooms. The museum used to be on Duckworth Street, and so I was a tour guide and then a special event manager, but I got to deal with the marine biology there. So down below in the bowels of the old Newfoundland Museum, that's where they kept the giant squid, which is now an exhibit at the rooms. You should go see it if you haven't seen it. It's
Before it rots away.
Before it rots away. Before it swims out through the Narrows. It's 30 feet long, encased. You can go see it on the third floor of the rooms. A wonderful building that houses the art gallery, archives, and museum. But and there would be vets. Our curator, John Monder, a wonderful educator and biologist, marine biologist. He kept all these creatures in containers, and they had these markings on it, like conjoined seals, or hobgoblin sharks, and all sorts of sea lice, and just vast, children's delight. So every time I took a tour group down there, I could see the look, especially in the children's eyes, but also adults looking at these creatures that exist just below the waves. And I said, well, like Michael said, that's not good for a story. I don't know what is. So it always stuck with me back in the 90s, and I finally got around to use some of that as well.
Where do you find time to write a novel if you're writing 20 TV shows?
Oh, that's the trick. And during COVID, I think like most people, there was a window of opportunity where the world shut down for a while, and I was able to utilize some of those months to actually start. And I was fortunate enough to have a really great editor, Anita Provost and Janie Ewan from Simon & Schuster, who were wonderful, and it was my first book. So, I just really wanted to get it right. I wanted to tell the story that I wanted to tell and hope it sort of resonated with everybody, but I also wanted to get it right because it was sort of about my hometown, and it was about, the marine biology of this place and the history. So I really wanted to make sure I got it right. And so I really sort of labored over it, and it took about a year or so, but it got tougher when we started shooting Son of a Critch again.
Right.
My Maureen was very patient with me, thank goodness, the hours spent when I wasn't on set and all that. So we got it done, and it's been just a wonderful experience.
TV writing is so collaborative. It's done in a group, often, with very tight deadlines.
Oh, yes.
Whereas this is done alone, largely, this novel writing business. How did you
that's an interesting,
find that?
Yeah, it's completely different in many ways. It's almost like a solo album. If you're with a band and the band is the TV show, and I wanted to step out and do something of my own. But it is, TV writing is very collaborative. You usually have a room of writers. You break story, and then a writer goes away and writes an outline, and then they come back and we talk that out, and then that particular writer will go away and write a script. So we have a lot of support, but here you're on your own. You have an editor or two, but basically the world is the limit. And we talked about this earlier. It was just the idea that in production, we're under deadlines, but we're also under budgets. So we have budgets to adhere to. So if I write something in a script, I have to see it on the screen. So, but in the book, it's like, oh, how many icebergs do I want? 100, yeah, send them all down, it's fine. So there's no restriction. So creatively, you have the world. If you want to write about spaceships, you can write about spaceships. Or in this case, the ocean and icebergs and giant squid. Now, to produce it, that's another conversation,
Right.
where maybe I won't get 20 icebergs, I'll get one in a film version of that. But so it's very freeing in that way, for sure, creatively.
We were talking about the difference between screenwriting and fiction, and how you felt freed in the novel to like just do whatever you wanted, like you could have anything. And the little bit of script writing that I've done, I felt completely freed from having to describe every goddamn thing. That, like, if you want the reader to see it, you have to describe it. But if you're writing a script and you want a moonlit beach, you say moonlit beach, and then it's someone else's problem.
That's right.
They have to make that happen, and that has been so much fun to just like not have to think about that.
Right.
So
You don't
yeah.
have to get your thesaurus out.
Yeah.
That's such a great point. Yeah. And then you can focus on dialogue, and which again you're very good at all of it. But that's sort of I find that's the icing on the cake is the dialogue and the characters. But the descriptive side, you're absolutely right.
You don't start with dialogue?
No, in the book it's just a complete setup of the description describing your world. But as Michael said, oh my God, I found that really challenging at first. It's like it's a fish plant. Sure, look of it. And they're like, and the editor's like, not everybody knows what a fish plant is. It's like, what is right there? It's like, you're not going to get this. So, but Michael, yeah, that's a great point. And where now you're sort of switching to that world a little. That's so interesting to get the other side of that.
Yeah, for sure.
You thank someone who wrote a swearing dictionary in your acknowledgments. And I had some fun this morning picking out some of the best ones with my favorites anyway. Pricklouse, shagbag, belly timber. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Yeah, a mile wide and an inch deep, which I think I've heard before. But tell us about the swearing dictionary.
Well, there are a bunch of dictionaries that the Newfoundland, the Dictionary of Newfoundland English has been my go-to for ever since I started writing. And but when I started writing The Innocents, I realized it was so far back that most of the characters that showed up in that little cove were not Newfoundlanders, they were Europeans. Mm-hmm. They had come over from the continent. So I started looking for something like the Dictionary of Newfoundland English for people at the time, in England or Ireland or whatever. And God bless the internet, I came across something called A Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, which was compiled in the late 1790s.
Oh, wow.
Updated 1811. And at the time, vulgar just meant common. So it was how common people spoke on the docks and in the streets and in the brothels and the bars. But there was a lot of vulgar language in that dictionary. And like the Dictionary of Newfoundland English, the creativity and the outlandishness with which people were able to like describe the world that they lived in and also insult the people they were with was so fantastic that I plundered. Like I went through that thing with a fine-tooth comb and just stole endlessly to try to give a sense of how those characters spoke at the time, but also just for the pure pleasure of allowing that language to have a life in the book.
Yeah.
There's one scene in the book where when Abe brings the prostitutes to St. John's, to Mockbeggar, and he's setting them up in his old childhood home. And so the madam is saying, so how many bedrooms are upstairs? He says, well, there's 2 upstairs and there's also the servants' room off the kitchen. And she says, oh, the servants' room, I imagine that's seen its share of the old art of basket making. And Abe has no idea what she's saying, so she tries a different euphemism, and he still doesn't know. And then she just gives a list of all these euphemisms for sex until she hits one that Abe understands. And the only reason that scene is in the book was so that I could write that list of all the euphemisms for sex that I found. I don't know if I could find it.
I can ask Perry a question while you
Yes,
find it.
I'll look for it.
This is going to be good.
Do you ever wonder, Perry, if the moratorium hadn't happened, what you'd be doing? I mean, you've had such a success as a writer, but would you be in a boat?
That's a great question. No, I think because the more I was older than the character in the book, so when the moratorium hit, I was almost finished my degree at Memorial. So I had other plans, but it would definitely, my brother Terry, who is still involved in the crab industry, would have still been there. My father for sure, my mother working in the plant for sure. So their plans changed drastically, and their way of life changed because the income went away, and then they had to and then they brought in the idea of retraining and all of that, you know, the opportunity.
Everybody can be a hairdresser.
Everybody can be a hairdresser, but not realizing, you know, these fishermen and fisher people and plant workers have been doing this for 40, 50 years. You just can't put people in a classroom environment and then it was. So at the time, my father was 65, my mother was, you know, the same age. So the idea that they had to go back and sit in a classroom, like, it was just too much and too foolish to think about, really. Like, so they, you know, luckily they were at the retirement age, but others, you know, ended up moving away or pivoting to something else. But it was very difficult.
I heard you say that maybe this might be made into...
I know some people, a film or
You know some people?
Yeah, I've met some, it would be wonderful. I had an eye when I was writing it.
It has a very tight feel, like a script, like you're so skilled, right, at creating a story that is economical and moves and propulsive, and yeah, it has all that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and that would be a goal of mine to adapt that to either a film or a limited. I see it as a limited series, just to properly be able to tell that story and create that world. But it's definitely on my list, and there's been conversations and all.
Good.
So that would be a wonderful thing to do. If there's any producers who would like to work in the audience today, myself and Michael are open to any discussions on no, but it's definitely on our list for sure.
Good, glad to hear it. All right, let's have the sex list.
So it.
Okay. Actually, as it turns out, it's a lot shorter than I remembered.
Is it going to make you blush?
No, I don't think so. How many bedrooms are upstairs? 3, he said. And there's a bedroom off the kitchen at the back. The servant's room? Yes. It's seen its share of the good old trade of basket making, no doubt. Abe stared blankly. The blanket hornpipe, she said. The goat's jig? Click it? Making feet for children's stockings. She looked out the window and sighed heavily. This will do nicely, she said.
Oh, yes.
I feel like you've heard enough from me now. Has anyone in the audience got any questions for Michael or for Perry? Come on, we got all the brothers over there, all the Crummy brothers and the Crummy mother. You got no questions for Michael?
She wouldn't dare.
Michael's mother says nope.
It's a shy crowd.
Wow, that is weird. Okay.
We shouldn't have jumped from the sex thing straight to the audience questions.
It's a tough segue.
Yeah.
When you're writing your novels, I've heard that you basically lock yourself in a room and just write, and you pop out a novel.
Well, it is.
Lisa Moore told me that. She said you just sit down and out it comes.
Right. Maybe that's truer of me than a lot of other writers, and it's certainly truer of me now than it used to be. I don't talk about it.
Beforehand, you mean the stories?
Or while I'm doing it.
Okay.
So I do. When I was writing Sweetland, I remember Holly and I were getting ready to go out the door, and I said to her, I think I'm going to send the novel to my editor this week. And she was like, novel? What novel? You're writing a novel? And so it just kind of happens under the,
under the domestic radar.
Yes, I go to my room and I spend my few hours working on it, and then I do other stuff the rest of the day, And I'm not somebody who needs to talk it out, and I don't like talking about it while I'm working on it. because it feels like a very private thing, and I don't really want anyone else's fingers in there mucking with it until I feel like I'm done with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember I gave Holly Galore to read, and that one took about a year and a half to get a first draft. And so she was the first one to look at it, so I gave it to her, and then the next day I took it away from her.
She was asking too many questions?
I just emotionally wasn't
Oh.
ready. Like, I just wanted to have more time on my own with it. So, and I think maybe what Lisa is talking about, like both The Innocents and The Adversary were written really quickly. The Innocents is based partly on a true story, something I found in the archives. It's just like a paragraph-long thing about a clergyman, a traveling clergyman. So far back, it was most places in Newfoundland didn't have a church, and the clergy would travel. And he came upon an orphan brother and sister in a tiny cove, and the sister was pregnant. And he assumed, quite rightly, I'm sure, that the brother was the father.
There's some basket making going on.
Yes, right. They were making feet for children's stockings. And he did his clergyman thing, and the brother drove him out of the cove with a rifle. And that was it. That was all that was there. And I immediately thought, oh, there's a story. And my second thought was, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Like, no, I am not writing that book. And I didn't take a note of it. I don't know where I couldn't find it again to save my life. But I could not quite escape those youngsters. And it was years later, I think 6 or 7 or 8 years later, that I finally sat down to write it. And I thought, okay, if I'm writing this story, I just want it out of me and done. So I'd never done this before, but I wrote every single day until I had a first draft, which took about 3.5, 4 months. And then the editing process was really fast as well. So it went from nothing to a finished book in about 8 or 9 months.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I mean, if another writer had said to me beforehand, before I did that myself, that that's how they wrote, I would have shot them on the spot. So I try not to talk about it too much, because it does feel like unfair.
Unnatural.
Unnatural and unfair. But also, you know, like and because The Adversary, I thought of it as a mirror image, why? I thought, oh, I've got to do the same thing. So I wrote every single day until I had a first draft. So it's an unnatural process and not entirely healthy, I think. But there is something to be said for, like, being done.
Getting it done.
Getting it done. So yeah, the last two I have kind of popped out.
Did your editors, mainlanders, have any kind of hesitation about such characters that were just so unredeemable and so nasty? Like, as Newfoundlanders with our dark sense of humor,
Right.
you can see some humor in it.
Yeah. Actually, no, there was none. In fact, the response was really, really positive.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a page turner. Like, as far as my books go, it's pretty propulsive.
Yeah.
You know, and in some ways, this book is about what happens next all the way through. Because the character development, there's some for the secondary characters, but it's not about character development or these characters unfolding as the book goes on. It's about what happens next.
Yeah.
So I think the response to the novel really has been shockingly positive. I think partly because of that. So there was no one who said. In fact, my editor and my wife Holly and my agent all said that they had been rooting for the widow. So I had to go back and make it even darker than it was. Yeah. So that was the only real change that came out of that process.
Yeah. You made it worse.
I made it worse. I made them worse. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I had to the widow had to do some things that were clearly, obviously, the actions of somebody with no redeeming,
With no remorse.
no remorse and no real heart at the center of what they're up to. Yeah.
As a screenwriter, Perry, when you were reading The Adversary, were you thinking, that's what it worked so well in Frontier?
Oh yes, more of that. And absolutely, because that was a historical drama around the fur trade, which is absolutely brutal in many ways. But it's funny. It did remind me of that times 10, because it was definitely a page, and I quite enjoyed it. It was such a dark historical piece that I read it with my partner Maureen, and she'd be a little bit ahead of me when we were reading. I was like, don't tell me, what's coming next? She said, you wouldn't believe this. And she started jumping around, pointing at it. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready for it. But it did, it's funny, and I think it would be a wonderful adaptation on the film.
Christian Sparks, who adapted Sweetland, he invited me out for a coffee, and we had done a lot of back and forth on the script with Sweetland, and just really loved working together and talking about film and how story works and stuff. So he had me out for a coffee in January and asked if I'd be interested in writing a script for him.
Oh.
And I said, well, I mean, I don't have any ideas really. Like, do you have something? And he pitched this period horror flick, an idea for a period horror movie that he's been kicking around for a while with a friend of his. And I said, Christian, I don't really think horror is my thing. And he said, I just read your last book. I think you have it in you.
I would agree with him, yes.
So it was really interesting to take that. So instead of thinking of it as a horror flick, I was just sort of like, well, just think of it as The Adversary and dial it up a notch or two. Like, just move a little
Gothic
further.
it up.
Gothic it up a little more in that direction. And it's been a blast to work on.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we have that to look forward to.
Well, I mean,
As well as
if we're
Paris.
able to find money for it, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, my work is done.
That's right.
And now Christian has to do the ugly, like,
Format.
please, sir, could we have $1.5 million?
No, ask for more.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the audience. You've had time to think about it. Surely there's a question or two.
Angela, we've also got the picks, and we just put the
Oh,
slide
yes.
up with Perry's picks, and then we've got Michael's after
Oh,
that.
do you want to talk about your picks, Perry?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Even though Michael broke the screen here, you can look on the side.
The other one, yeah. Oh, there's 5. Yeah, so, by the way, this was very difficult to choose
Yes,
5, of course.
just 5.
But so I chose to choose 5 that I had a direct impact on me for interesting reasons. So the first being Death on the Ice, of course. Cassie Brown. I think it was the first Newfoundland book I read of the sealing about the sealing disaster of 1914, and I think it was 100 over. I can't remember, the 137 men or something on the ice. 2/3 of them perished. In an attempt to get the seal, and just the impact of that tragedy, and reminding me, our connection to the ocean and the sea, and how tragedy and how it can give life and take life. But it was one of the first I've read. I think it was the very first book I read, and with archival illustrations. It was just so powerful. And
It's one of the best nonfiction books ever written.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
agree with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally, and it did definitely have an impact on my first novel as well. I totally agree. Random passage. So that's interesting. I had at my capacity as a museum educator, I started the book club back in the early 90s, and our first author was Bernice Morgan. Incredible. She came down and spoke about her book and her process, which is the first time I ever heard an author talk about process, and how she had 2 books. The Waiting for Time was the sequel, and how her editor made her divided at a certain point. I just found it fascinating. And the idea, I think it was 10 years later, it was adapted to a series, and they built a set out near Trinity, and how the idea that a Newfoundland IP, a Newfoundland novel, could be, is more than worthy enough to be turned into a limited series, or of course it could be, because the talent that we have here. So that was proof for me that could be done.
Yeah.
And a wonderful story. Lisa Moore's Cod, we produced, Lisa Moore was kind enough to entrust us with her novel. Myself and Alan Hocko developed that into a series, limited series for CBC that was really successful. And Lisa was so kind and generous. And Michael, we were talking earlier about as an author, how much input you would have into that process and trusting somebody and then you having input as an author back. She was incredible, and Lisa Moore is just amazing. And it's a wonderful story that starts with a prison break. I mean, come on, that's just incredible. Of course, Alan Doyle I'm fairly familiar with. I grew up with Alan from the time we were 4 years old, and his story, his memoir, a story where he comes from, about growing up in Petty Harbour, and many of the stories in there, of course, I was one of the accomplices, so it brought back a lot of memories. But the idea that somebody like Alan, from his humble beginnings in a small fishing community, that could rise up, that would grow, use that and incorporate that into his, to the essence of who he is. He's such a wonderful human being. He hasn't changed a bit since the time we were fighting for cod tongues on a wharf, till the time that we graduated university together, until he built one of the most successful bands in Canada. And just those stories about how, and this book takes you right to the beginnings of Great Big Sea. But it's just a wonderful story and a wonderful memoir. And Alan's one of the most gifted storytellers. I've been fortunate enough in our business to meet some incredible storytellers, and he's still probably the best one I've ever heard. He tends to bend the truth a little, but hey, don't let that get in the way of a good story. And then finally, of course, Mark Rich, speaking of storytellers, and one of the finest as well. I'm fortunate enough to adapt Mark's memoir, working with Mark and on this series has been an absolute treat. He's such a gifted comedian, story writer, actor. But what I found out while working with Mark and in his book, he's one of the hardest working people I've ever worked with. He just spends so much time at the craft of writing, and which is really important to me because it's everything. The structure, Mark working on scripts and seeing the amount of time and effort he puts into it. It's just truly impressive. But the book is hilarious, and we took a lot of the stories from Son of a Critch you'll see in the series, including him as a kid walking down Kenmount Road, the last house out he used to live on near VOCM, dressed for Halloween in the Halloween costume at the age of 8, the one with the string on it and the mask, and the wind blowing the mask off, and there's no houses around, so he'd end up going to the gas station in the hotel trick-or-treating. It's like, because that's all was out on Kenmount Road at the time. Those stories, and all of them, so I don't know if you've been watching the series, but almost all of it comes from those books, and he's such a gifted and incredible storyteller as well. So those are the 5 I chose. I could have chose 1,000 from here, because I'm such a fan of Newfoundland and Labrador art, but those 5 spoke to me for those reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael. So these are Michael's picks. I was going to ask you about the black character in your book, but I didn't. But you're going to talk about Black Harbour now, so you'll get to that.
Right. Well, I should preface this by saying when I was trying to come up with my list of 5, of course, it's a really difficult thing to do. Yeah. But I'm married to a writer, and for some reason, Holly's book did not come into my head. And this is our 18th wedding anniversary, and it might be our last. I don't know. So I'll just say Holly Hogan's Message in a Bottle, which won the Winterset Award this past year.
In case she's watching on YouTube.
That's right. I was also nominated for the Winterset Award. I'm not bitter. Anyway. So these were my picks. Black Harbour is a nonfiction book about the histories of African and Black people in Newfoundland, which is completely buried, has been completely buried. I had no idea there was any history of...
But of course it makes sense.
Of course it makes sense of people enslaved and living in Newfoundland, and also people of African descent who have come through here
as crew
members and all that sort of stuff, which makes total sense. So the thing I love about history is that it keeps changing. Mm-hmm. You think you know the story of the place you come from, and then you realize actually it's a lot different than you thought. So that's a new book to me, and I really recommend it. Lisa Moore shows up again. Lisa Moore is often mistaken for my wife on the internet. It's true. My Holly once, she was looking up
And
something
they're
for
good
me.
friends, just like-
She was Holly's maid of honor
Yes.
at the wedding. But if Holly was looking up something online, you do Michael Crummy, and then it suggests things, and one of them was wife. So she said I had to look, and it was all pictures of me and Lisa. So Open was her second collection of short stories. Now, the New York Times has called her a master of the short story form. That was me in the New York Times, but it has more force if you say the New York Times said it. And this book, I've loved everything that Lisa's written, but this book has stayed with me from I was stunned by it. Every story, I was stunned by the writing in it. And just about everybody I know who's read it agrees that there's 3 or 4 absolutely classic masterpiece short stories in there, but nobody agrees on which ones they are. So I can't recommend that book highly enough. The Grey Islands by John Steffler. This is a book,
It's a beautiful book.
a fantastic, just one of the best books ever written about Newfoundland. And it's a mix of poetry and prose. There's kind of a narrative to it. It's about a CFA who lives in Corner Brook who decides to spend a summer on the Grey Islands alone, and about him slightly losing his mind while he's out there. But it's a naturalist book. It's one of the best evocations of the Newfoundland landscape I've ever encountered. It retells the stories of the people he meets on the way to the Grey Islands and some of the stories of the people who once lived there. I go back to it all the time. Fantastic book. Oh, and then there's this Prime Birth by Bruce Whiffen, which I have, for The Innocents and The Adversary, I have just stolen shamelessly from. He wanted to tell the most interesting stories from the town he came from, going right back to the time it was first settled by Europeans. And it's just full of the most amazing characters and amazing stories.
When was it published?
God, it's been out a long time now. And he's actually published another book about Bonavista since then, the name of which escapes me, but you'll be able to find it by searching his name. And the last one up there is Soft Serve, short stories by Alison Graves. That's a recent book, came out just last year with Breakwater. Alison's originally from Ontario, came here to go to school.
Her mother's from Belle Island.
Her mother's from Belle Island, thank you. And she says in the acknowledgments that Lisa Moore convinced her to stay here and write stories. And that is, this is the result of that, and it's one of the freshest, most exciting books of short fiction I've read in a long time. Completely original voice. Every story is funny and sad and completely compelling.
Snowmageddon's in there.
Snowmageddon is in there, and it's sort of a mix of 20-somethings worlds here in Newfoundland and in Ontario.
Yes, if you want to know what the young people are up to.
And how they're thinking about what's going on, then that's a place to go. I absolutely love that book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. I have no idea what time it is. I'm supposed to be hosting this thing and keeping it on track. Have we been talking for? Oh my God, right on time. That's the radio girl in me, see? Are there any questions online? No, okay. Any questions in the room? I know as soon as we stop, everyone's going to come up and ask questions, so just ask one now. Oh, someone asking? Oh, no. All right.
There's one behind you there.
All right, we have a brave person. All right, thank God.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
All right.
When, Perry, you commented about the death and the wedding, I just read an article on the CBC about the current almost disaster of the 7 lucky men. And in the story that was written, one of the men asked if they could take him to St. John's because his sister was getting married the next day.
Oh, no.
And then he said, oh no, my truck is at the wharf, so bring me home, and then I'll get to St. John's. So they're married together, aren't they? Regardless of the time, death and life is married together here in Newfoundland.
Absolutely.
So I thought of that when you
that's-
commented on it.
Thank you. I didn't know that part of the story. That's, oh wow, that's absolutely so poignant. That's incredible. But you're absolutely right. One without the other. But it can change. I just find in Newfoundland, it can change so quickly. And especially in communities like Petty Harbour or Perigo or Mockbeggar, where it's just so, fragile, and that everybody knows everybody else's business. So what impacts one person impacts an entire community more so in these small towns. But thank you for sharing that. That's incredible.
Question for Michael. Enjoyed your meeting your parents. I agree the world is very depressing as you look forward. I just wondered if you could give us any grounds for optimism, or maybe you have a book with wonderful characters coming, or what can we hope for?
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah. I guess really, Holly, my wife's book is about the plastic crisis and by extension the global environmental crisis. And there's a lot of really depressing stuff in there. And she was determined not to write a book without hope. And but she was finding that very difficult. And she was talking to our friend Monica Kidd about just her frustration with what we are doing to the world that we live in. And Monica said, that's true, and it's easy just to fall into that. But she said, people are the problem, but people are also going to be the solution, right? That the more Holly dug into it, the more people and institutions she found who are out there doing the work required to find solutions to these problems. I do think it's an open question as to whether or not it's going to be in time. But I do feel like, so people are the problem, but people are also the solution, possibly, right? And we have to cling to that. We have to push for that in our own communities, push people to be better, push ourselves to be better. I mean, if you look at what happened in France in the most recent election, where the people in the center and on the left decided it was more important to stop the hard right than worry about our own little party, and they worked together. I took a lot of comfort in that. I am hoping that we'll see something like that south of the border. There's a difference between hope and optimism. I'm not optimistic, but I am hopeful. So that's all I got for you.
I have a question. What are some of your earliest influences, like as children, in terms of books or movies or whatever?
Oh wow! With books, I grew up with I guess Kevin Major. That was sort of my introduction to books, and I remember in Petty Harbour we had a bookmobile. It was so small we didn't have a library. We had a bus that was filled out with books that would come every week, and probably some of you had the same thing. There we go, right? You know about the bookmobile. I remember just devouring as many of those books as we could get in there, and that was that bus program was one of the most influential for me as a writer. And then I went on to work in bookstores, which was great. Afterwards, Bookstore and Dixon Company, these bookstores years ago. And then I grew up with television. One of my favorite programs, WKRP years ago. It's funny, I'm working on Son of a Critch about another radio station, so that kind of worked out. As well as what influenced me for the detective side were things like the Rockford Files and Magnum PI, and all those great PI detective shows of years ago. So those were sort of my influences growing up.
Well, I was a big reader as a kid. And, like Dr. Seuss was absolutely central to my understanding of the world when I was a youngster. In Buckens, we did have a library, a public library. And I used to go there and spend every Saturday morning and it was things like Tintin and Asterix, those comics that told stories were huge. Kevin Major was the first live writer I ever encountered. He came to our high school to J.R. Smallwood Collegiate in Wabash.
Oh, wow.
And did a reading. And I remember he was reading from his second novel, and the opening scene is a drunk father falling into a Christmas tree and saying as he falls in, "Jesus Christ, my face." And I was like, wow, he just swore at school and nobody's mad at him. That would be a cool job. So that's some of them.
Thank you.
Do you write poetry while you're writing novels, or do you keep the two very separate, or do you find them generative?
I used to keep them very separate, and it used to feel like I had no control over that. So, and I think the novels they're just so huge and all-encompassing that it just felt like there was no room for anything else. And if I saw something that I thought I could write about, I thought about it in the context of the novel.
Right.
So the poetry only happened between the novels, and it was kind of a relief, to take up something different. But as I've gotten older, those dividing lines have gotten thinner and thinner. So now, like when I was writing Sweetland, I would write at the novel in the morning, and in the afternoon, like I would poke away at an article I was writing, or work on poetry, and it does feel like I'm able to compartmentalize those things without the sort of more formal, now it's novel,
Right.
when that's done, it's poetry.
Right.
Now it just all kind of happens at the one time, it feels like.
Okay. What about you, Perry? Do you compartmentalize it by times of day, or
I do.
or whoever's paying the paycheck?
Whoever's that's right. Whoever. It's fun because the television world it can be very taxing. We start in May or even April writing the scripts in a room, and then we go away and write, and that takes a long time and much of your day. It can take 7-8 hours, and then we go to camera, and then you're on set for 10 to 12 hours a day, and after that you have to go back and do rewrites and all. So it can be very, very taxing of your time. So when I'm in that zone, I tend to stay in that zone, but then plan for the time to get at a book, or working on songs with the very talented Maureen Ennis of the Ennis Sisters. So we have a very creative environment in our home, which as you as well with Holly. I mean, we're very fortunate to have such talented partners. So it's a really great environment to write in at any time. But I try to set aside time when I get with the novel. I want to stay in that world because it's easier to stay. And like Michael, it's funny. I don't want anyone else to see it or touch it until I'm done, other than the editor. That process, because I only want positive feedback. No, positive feedback only. So only Maureen will read it at times, and she's been so incredible. But I really, when I'm in that world, I want to stay in that world. So I really need to put aside huge chunks of time to do that. So at the end of this, if I'm hoping to write another one, it will be after the show stops for a while, and I can start. Not to say that I won't do rewrites and take notes from the editor's notes while I'm shooting, because you kind of have to do that. But yeah.
I wonder if people understand how many iterations a TV script goes through.
Oh my goodness, there's so many. So yeah, it starts off in a writing room. If you're fortunate enough to have a team, and it starts with you breaking story, what we call the spine of the story.
About 6 people, 8 people.
Oh, it could be
Draw
any.
a picture for us, Perry.
Yeah, it's anywhere from. It's gotten smaller with COVID and all. There's been these micro rooms, so it could be anyone from 4 to 10, 12 people at times in a room. And what COVID has done, it's opened up the world of Zoom. So we can now write, before Zoom, before COVID, you would write in a room. So physically you had to be there, which, you know, you travel to Toronto, Los Angeles, or wherever to write it, or St. John's. But now you can do it on Zoom, and I can be working with anyone from LA to London, you know. It's that part's wonderful, but it doesn't really beat the human experience of being together. So after that, you break story together. You break the mystery. You have whiteboards everywhere, and somebody's taking notes, and you talk about how a mystery would play out. And so you set up beats in each. There's 5 acts in a drama, 3 acts in a comedy, and you start by putting in sort of tent poles. Where do you want the act 1 to end and act 2, and where do you want the story to end as a mystery? So you plot out, for example, the mystery side of things, and the whole mystery is broken in the room. You know, if there's a murder in the first act, you know, you set up the world of suspects, wheel of suspects, and you set up all sort of mystery beats, what they're finding as detectives or PIs, and at the end, you know, and then after that, you start to fill in the personals. You know, the relationships between the PIs or the cops or the families that are involved, and you weave those in. So at the end of the day, you have a 5-act structure that's sort of in a beat sheet form, you know, just 1 lines on each. And then you take that and turn it into what's called an outline, which is taking those beats and just talking them out a bit further. And from that, it goes to a draft. And then from a draft to a second draft to eventually what we call production white. And production white you can shoot, you can go to camera. And in between that, you get network notes. And sometimes you get notes from multiple networks. So if you're in partnership, for us, we get notes from CBC, but also Lionsgate, who are a distributor, and CW Network, who are in the States. So that's 3 sets of notes. And sometimes
To
they're usually
change the script?
Oh yes, yeah, to meet their criteria, you know, and some, you know, mostly great notes. Sometimes the notes will contradict each other because you're dealing with 3. If you're dealing with 3 different sets of notes, guaranteed they'll bump. But we've been fortunate enough with the shows I've worked on that the notes have been really good. But they can turn into horror stories where you're, you know, you're trying to hang on to the vision of your show, but it's being sort of stepped on a little by other ideas what the show should be. And that's what a showrunner's role is. The showrunner is the holder of the vision of the show, and that person usually is the creator of the show, and they deal with all of that.
When Christian was talking to me about possibly writing a script with them, he said, apropos of nothing, he said, you know, working in film is notes until you die. And it is true. Like, there are just endless notes from from every angle. And they're almost always useful. Even when you disagree with them, they're useful. But I mean, I'm very new to this world, and I'm already done with it. I'm like, okay, all right, Christian, no more notes. No more notes.
You have to be so diplomatic, right? Because these people are paying for the thing.
You do, and a lot of it, too, and you're absolutely right, because it also comes from the director, from other producers. So, and the other thing is making it producible. So it's great that we are able to do this, and the sky's the limit. But then when you get to the screen, it's like, okay, instead of an iceberg, could it be just like a car drives by? You know, like that'll save us so much money. So there's those discussions about how to shoot it efficiently and effectively with a budget that you're given, and that's where the challenges come in. And dealing with people like Christian and my team, like they're really good at making the budgets work, but making the story also not suffer. And that's the key. In film is just making sure that if you got a great script that you're going to be able to tell it with the budget that you have, because the sky is not the limit with our budgets.
Right. Do we? We have a question.
Oh.
Okay, here's another one. Okay. When you were speaking there about the structure of the script being a 5-act, eventually turning into this iteration of a 5-act structure, it made me wonder if you used that when you went to write your novel.
Oh, yeah.
If you were able to build that up in the similar kind of way.
I did. That's a great question. I did. I developed a discipline for structure with script writing that might be 5 acts or 3 acts with a comedy. And I just looked at the novel as a longer version of that with 36 chapters. And I broke those up into a similar structure whereby I knew I needed to tell a certain story within a certain amount of chapters, if that makes sense. And so for me, I needed a map to really tell the story I wanted to. And once I had the 32 or 36 chapters sort of written out on a whiteboard about what each chapter would be about, then I could have fun because I knew I had I had the roadmap drawn. Some writers don't need that, and I don't know how they do that. I'm not sure if you have to have your structure, Michael. Maybe not, but I need to see the full map before I can really be comfortable. But yeah, absolutely, the structure and the discipline from screenwriting really helped me with writing this.
Yeah, it sounded different from what Michael said when he said you get a germ of an idea and you see how the story plays out. It sounded more. I don't know if you use a structure as well.
I don't, as a rule. I generally have a sense of what I want the story to be, or things I want to hit at some point in the story, like a character that I want to come in at some point, or a particular incident. And I usually have a sense of what the ending will at least feel like, even if I don't know what the ending is. And that's really important because I just make it up as I go. So to have a sense of what the ending is going to feel like is really important, because every time I make a decision about what's happening or about a character coming in, I can say, is this heading towards that ending I want? And if it's not, then it's not going to work. You know, so that's really the only kind of guide that I have I give to myself when I'm writing. And outside of that, it's just kind of feeling my way. There's a writer from Ontario named Terry Griggs, and she said writing a novel is like pushing a peanut across a ballroom floor with your nose. And it's like that. Like, that's how much every day you push it once, and that's how far you get. But for me, my addition to that is you have to keep looking up across the ballroom floor, because otherwise you're just going to end up going off and hitting the wall over here, right? So for me, it's just thinking about where is the peanut going today, but also, am I still on line to get across the ballroom as opposed to hitting the wall on the side?
Yeah, thank you
Great question.
both.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great.
All right,
Thank you.
everybody, I think we should end. I know there's more questions, but you can come up and get Michael and Perry to sign your books and ask your questions in person. We always announce the next book traditionally at the end, and I'm really pleased to announce that the September-October pick for Coastlines is Marjorie Doyle's Mary Foley, Mary Doyle, Unraveling a Mother's Secrets. So we're really looking forward to that. And thank you so much, Perry, and thank you, Michael,
Thank you, Angela.
for this lovely morning.
Thank you all. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone on the Coastlines Committee, to Newfoundland Quarterly, to Writers NL, to all the supporters, to all the Bookmobile fans who make this happen every few months. And we're going to announce the door prize winner, right?
Ooh.
All right. Janet, you come up and announce. Janet, come on.
It better be number 29.
Oh my God! It is number 20.
No,
Actually,
shut
I
up.
already picked it.
That's Michael's mother.
That's my mom.
That's hilarious.
Not rigged at all. Totally
It is.
legit.
It's 29.
Totally
I already
legit.
had it. I had it in my head.
Thanks, everybody.
Well done.